In the vast, open land of the Wild West, where the wind whispered secrets through tall grasses, lived a brave woman named Sarah. Her small cabin, built from sturdy logs, sat right on the very edge of where towns ended and the wild, untamed world began. Each morning, she would step outside, her eyes scanning the horizon, a hopeful look on her face. Sarah was waiting for her husband, Thomas, to come back home. He had gone on a long, hard journey to trade furs and supplies, a journey that had taken him far, far away for many months. Sarah missed him very much. She tended her garden, chopped wood, and kept their home warm, always thinking of the day Thomas would walk through the door again. One evening, as Sarah was mending a tear in her favorite blanket, the sky outside turned a bruised purple. Soon, a terrible storm began to rage. The wind howled like a hungry wolf, shaking the cabin walls, and rain beat hard against the window panes. Sarah's heart thumped with worry. Thomas was out there, somewhere in this wild weather. Was he safe? Was he warm? The thought of him battling the storm made her hands tremble. She poked at the fire, trying to make the flames dance higher, hoping their warmth would chase away her fears. But then, a strange thing happened. Even with the fire blazing, a sudden, cold gust of wind snaked through the cabin, chilling her to the bone. It felt as if an invisible door had opened, letting in the icy breath of the storm right into her cozy home. The cold wind made Sarah shiver, but it also sparked a memory deep inside her. An old tale, told by her grandmother, came to mind. It was a story about a special candle, lit with true love, that could cut through the darkest night and guide lost souls home. Sarah hurried to a small, wooden box tucked away in a corner. Inside, nestled among dried herbs, was a candle unlike any other. It was thin and tall, made of pure beeswax, and held a faint, sweet smell. With trembling hands, Sarah took out a match. She held the candle carefully, closed her eyes, and whispered a silent wish for Thomas's safety. Then, with a soft scratch, she lit the wick. A small, steady flame bloomed, pushing back the shadows and making the cabin feel a little less lonely, a little more hopeful. The special candle stood tall, its flame dancing softly, casting a warm glow on Sarah's worried face. She watched it, feeling a tiny bit of peace settle in her heart. The storm still roared outside, but inside, the candle's light felt like a small shield against the wild night. Then, a faint sound, barely heard over the wind, made her jump. Creak. The cabin door, which she had latched tight, slowly began to open. A thin crack appeared, letting in a sliver of the stormy darkness. Sarah held her breath. Was it Thomas, finally home? Her heart pounded with a mix of hope and fear. But as the door swung wider, the light from her candle showed a tall, dark shape standing there. It wasn't Thomas. It was a stranger, looming in the doorway, silhouetted against the raging storm. Sarah stood frozen, her eyes wide, watching the stranger. He didn't speak. Instead, with a slow, quiet movement, he stepped across the threshold, bringing a swirl of cold air and the wild night into her warm cabin. The storm's angry roar seemed to lessen for a moment as he entered. His tall frame filled the doorway, and the wide brim of his hat kept his face hidden in deep shadow, even from the candle's brave light. All Sarah could make out was the dark outline of his strong shoulders and the damp fabric of his long coat. But what truly caught her notice was the scent he carried. It wasn't the usual smell of mud or wet fur from a traveler. This man smelled deeply of fresh pine needles and the clean, sharp scent of rain-soaked earth, as if he had walked right out of the heart of the forest. The stranger stood still, dripping a little onto the wooden floor, the scent of the wild clinging to him. Sarah's heart was still hammering like a blacksmith's hammer, but she knew she couldn't stay silent. She was alone, but she was also a frontier woman, used to facing dangers. Gathering all her courage, she took a deep breath, her gaze fixed on the shadowy figure. Her voice, though a little shaky, came out clear. "Who are you?" she asked, her words cutting through the sound of the storm. She paused, then added, her voice a bit stronger, "And what do you want in my home?" Her eyes flickered to the axe leaning by the fireplace, a silent promise that she wouldn't be an easy target. The stranger remained still, not moving a muscle, as if weighing her brave words. For a moment, the stranger remained quiet, and Sarah braced herself, ready for anything. Then, a voice, deep and calm like a flowing river, filled the small cabin. It was not a voice of threat, but one that seemed to carry the quiet wisdom of ancient forests. "Forgive my sudden entry, madam," he said, his words soft but clear. "I was lost in the storm's fury, blinded by the rain and endless night." He paused, then slowly lifted a hand, pointing a gloved finger towards the special candle that still flickered bravely on Sarah's table. "Then, through the chaos, I saw it," he continued, his voice full of wonder. "A beacon, a tiny star in the overwhelming darkness. It called to me, a promise of warmth and safety." Sarah looked at the candle, then back at the stranger, a strange feeling blooming in her chest. The stranger lowered his hand, his voice still calm and kind. "I am but a humble traveler," he said, caught unaware by this fierce storm. "My path was lost, and the night grew too dark to see." He took a small step further into the room, his movements slow and careful, as if he meant to show he was no threat. "I only ask for a small corner by your fire, madam, to warm myself and rest until the morning light breaks through." His hat remained low, hiding his face, but his words were clear and honest. "I promise you no harm, only quiet presence. I will be gone with the first light of dawn, leaving your home as I found it." Sarah looked at the raging storm outside, then at the weary traveler. His words, though simple, held a deep sincerity. Sarah looked at the man, then at the wild storm still raging outside. Her mind told her to be careful, to send him away. But a strange, soft feeling grew in her heart. Even though his face was hidden, she felt as if something very old and very wise was looking at her from under the brim of his hat. It was a feeling she couldn't explain, a pull that told her he was not dangerous. It was like the deep quiet of the forest itself, calm and true. The wind howled again, and Sarah imagined Thomas out in that same cold. How could she turn away someone lost in such a night? Taking another deep breath, she nodded. "You may stay," she said, her voice softer now. "By the fire. But only until morning." The stranger gave a slight bow of his head, a silent thank you. The stranger moved gracefully to the stone hearth, settling himself on a small stool by the crackling fire. He didn't ask for food or drink, just sat quietly, letting the warmth soak into his wet clothes. The flickering firelight danced across his hat, still keeping his face in shadow, but Sarah no longer felt the sharp edge of fear. The storm outside began to sound like a distant rumble as the cabin grew warm and peaceful. After a while, the stranger began to speak, his voice a low, steady murmur. He told stories not of this frontier, but of ancient lands far away, of mountains that touched the stars, and hidden paths only known to a few. His tales were full of strange creatures and brave journeys, of magic woven into the very earth. To Sarah, these stories felt both wonderfully new and strangely familiar, like echoes from a time she had almost forgotten. As the stranger wove his magical tales, his gaze drifted to the special candle still burning on the table. He paused in his story, a thoughtful hum escaping his lips. "It was quite remarkable," he murmured, his voice softer now, the way the light cut through the dark. "Not just a single point, but a true path." Sarah leaned forward, her eyes wide, listening closely. "It was as if tiny stars had fallen to earth and were strung out, one after another, leading me directly to this very door," he explained, his gloved hand gesturing vaguely towards the window. A flickering trail, almost like a whisper in the wind, showing the way when all other directions were lost. Sarah looked at her candle. A small, quiet flame, and a shiver, not of cold but of wonder, ran down her spine. Could her simple wish and her grandmother's old tale truly hold such power? The night deepened, and the stranger continued his soft tales, his voice a comforting drone against the last whispers of the storm. Sarah found herself completely wrapped up in his words, forgetting her worries for a while. As he shifted slightly by the fire, a small, worn object caught her eye. It was hanging from a leather strap on his belt, peeking out from beneath his long coat. It looked like an old compass, made of dark, aged wood and tarnished brass. What truly made Sarah gasp, though silently, was that the compass wasn't just old, it was glowing. A very soft, gentle light, like moonlight on snow, came from its face. It pulsed faintly, a tiny star in the shadows, almost as if it breathed. It was not a reflection of the fire or the candle. It seemed to hold its own secret light, hinting at even more magic. The stranger's voice grew softer, and the glow from his compass seemed to dim a little, as if sharing his mood. He spoke of journeys not just through lands, but through time, and then, his stories took a turn. He began to speak of a long-lost love, a woman whose memory was as bright as any star, yet as distant as the moon. He didn't share many details, but the deep sadness in his voice, the way his shoulders seemed to slump just a bit, spoke volumes. Sarah felt a pang in her own heart. Waiting for Thomas, she knew what it felt like to miss someone dearly, to carry a quiet ache. She might not understand his ancient journeys or his glowing compass, but she understood the language of a lonely heart. In that moment, a bridge formed between the frontier woman and the mystical traveler, a shared feeling of sorrow for what was lost. The last of the stranger's sad tales faded into the quiet hum of the cabin. Outside, the angry roar of the storm had lessened, replaced by a soft patter of rain and the gentle sigh of the wind. A faint gray light, the first hint of dawn, began to peek through the window. As if sensing the change, the stranger stirred. He stood up slowly, his movements still graceful and quiet. His tall form seemed to stretch in the dim light. "The night passes," he said, his deep voice a little softer than before. He turned to Sarah, and though his face was still hidden by his hat, she felt his gaze upon her. "I must continue my journey." He paused, then added, "Thank you, Sarah, for your kindness. For the warmth, the safety, and for the beacon that guided me." His words were simple, yet full of true feeling. Before stepping towards the door, the stranger reached into a small pouch on his belt. Withdrawing his hand, he held out a small, smooth stone to Sarah. It was dark, like river rock, but felt strangely warm in his gloved fingers. "For your kindness," he said, his voice soft. "A small token." Sarah took the stone. It fit perfectly in her palm, surprisingly light, and felt smooth as polished glass. "This stone," the stranger continued, "will always guide your heart. It will whisper to you what is truly important, like a silent wish made real." He looked at her, and for a fleeting moment, the brim of his hat shifted just enough for Sarah to glimpse a hint of his eyes. Eyes that seemed to hold endless calm, like a deep, still lake. It was a gift more precious than gold, a promise of inner guidance. With the small stone safely clutched in her hand, Sarah watched as the stranger turned and walked towards the open door. The gray light of dawn was growing stronger, painting the sky with soft pink and orange hues. The rain had stopped completely, and only the drip of water from the eaves broke the morning quiet. As the stranger stepped out of the cabin and into the fresh, new light of the rising sun, something truly amazing happened. For just a heartbeat, as the first golden rays touched his long coat and wide-brimmed hat, his dark shape seemed to change. He shimmered, like water in sunlight, or heat rising from the desert floor. It was as if he wasn't made of flesh and bone, but of pure, glowing light, before he became solid again. Then, he was gone, walking silently into the morning mist, leaving Sarah blinking in wonder. Sarah stood by the open door, the small, warm stone in her hand, still wondering about the shimmering stranger. The mist was slowly lifting, revealing the familiar landscape around her cabin. She looked out, her eyes scanning the winding path that led back to town. And then, her breath caught in her throat. Far off in the distance, a small, dark shape appeared. It was moving slowly, steadily, getting bigger with each passing minute. Her heart leapt. There was something so familiar in that walk, that sturdy build, even from so far away. She squinted, shading her eyes with her hand, a wide smile slowly spreading across her face. It was him. It was Thomas, making his way home, looking tired but whole. He was finally here. Sarah rushed out to meet Thomas, her arms open wide. He looked weary, his clothes wet and muddy from the journey in the storm, but his eyes were bright with relief as he held her close. After a long hug, Thomas stepped inside, grateful for the warmth of the fire. "You wouldn't believe the night I had, Sarah," he sighed, sinking onto a stool. "That storm came out of nowhere, fierce as a wildcat. I thought I was lost for sure, couldn't see a foot in front of me." He shook his head, then looked at Sarah with a puzzled frown. "But then, just when I was about to give up, a strange, bright light appeared. Not a lightning flash, but a steady glow. It danced ahead of me, a guiding star, showing me the way through the worst of it. Led me right to our path." Sarah's eyes widened, her hand instinctively going to the smooth stone in her pocket. Thomas continued to tell his tale, rubbing his tired eyes, completely unaware of the strange visitor Sarah had hosted. Sarah, however, listened with a new understanding. She looked over at the table where her special candle had burned all night. Now, it was just a small stub of wax, completely melted down. Its job was done. Then, she looked down at the smooth stone she still held in her hand, feeling its gentle warmth. The stranger's words, his quiet wisdom, the glowing compass, and now Thomas's story of a guiding light, it all swirled together in her mind. Who was that man? Was he a lost traveler, or something more? A protector? A whisper from the old tales? She might never know for sure, but the questions sparkled like morning dew in her thoughts. With Thomas safe beside her, warming by the fire, Sarah finally understood. Her special candle, lit with a wish for her husband's safety, had done more than just burn brightly in the window. It had indeed guided Thomas home through the darkest part of the storm, just as she had hoped. But it had also reached out into the wild, bringing a magical visitor to her door. The mysterious stranger, with his ancient stories and glowing compass, was a gift from the night, a reminder that the world held wonders beyond what she could see every day. Her life on the frontier was hard, but now, it felt a little less lonely, a little more filled with magic. Holding the smooth stone, Sarah knew that her simple act of lighting a candle had woven a thread of wonder into the very fabric of her life, making it truly special.